Bethany Holmes stumbled over a tree root and dropped to the muddy ground. She caught herself on her hands, jarring her wrists. The backpack she carried thumped against her back. Her entire body felt the impact. It was still too dark outside to see clearly. Sunrise in Conneaut Lake, Pennsylvania wasn't for another 20 minutes. If she wanted to see where she was going, she needed to step carefully, but she couldn't slow down. Someone had come into her house. If she hadn't already put her cochlear implants in, and if the Marshals hadn't insisted on an alarm system with flashing lights for the deaf, she never would have known. It was a good thing she always woke up at 5 in the morning to do her Bible study before going into work. She glanced back at the house where she'd lived quietly for the past year. Was it a coincidence? Could she be the victim of a robbery? A sliver of light cut through the darkness. The intruders were coming outside. The back of the house was suddenly flooded with brightness as the motion sensor lights activated. Whoever it was must have stepped in front of the garage. She needed to contact her handler, Deputy U.S. Marshal Connor Schultz. But first, she needed to get to a safe spot. Bethany flattened herself against a large oak tree just outside the umbrella of light. Sliding lower, she peeked around the edge. She wanted to get a description of the trespassers for the cops. They were talking. She couldn't hear them from this distance. Could she take the risk? Deciding she didn't have a choice, she opened her phone's camera app and turned off the flash. Zooming in, she was able to lip read most of what they said. Bethany had honed that skill to do well in school. It had taken intense focus and practice. Only a third of the English speech sounds are visible on the lips. And so many sounds look the same. She was rather proud of the skill. Now she was using it to spy on criminals. She'd laugh if she weren't so close to being murdered. 2 men stood there. One was talking on his phone. "Yeah, boss. She's not here. Are we sure this is the right address?" The male on the kitchen counter said, "Bethany Holmes, not Sabrina Scanlon." They knew her real name. He grimaced. Apparently his boss had a few choice words for him. "I know, boss. We'll get her. Sabrina or Bethany, she's as good as dead." He hung up. Bethany pulled back to the safety of the tree. Her heart hammered in her chest like she'd just run a marathon. How could this happen? She'd done the right thing. The moment she'd realized she'd witnessed a murder plot, she'd completed her photography job, doing her best to act calm. Then she'd driven straight to the police. Never had she imagined becoming the target of an illegal weapons syndicate determined to end her life. Her would-be killers walked down the driveway and got into their vehicle. She waited until they'd been gone for 5 minutes before taking out her phone and dialing Connor's number. Somehow she'd been found. Connor had promised her no witness had ever been killed unless they hadn't followed the rules. But she'd followed them all. Cut off ties from her family, changed her name, her hair color, and wore blue contacts to hide her hazel eyes. She'd even given up her job as a photographer and now worked as a bank teller. But it hadn't been enough. And if she weren't smart, she'd soon be dead. Deputy U.S. Marshal Connor Schultz glanced down at his phone when it rang. Although it was a normal ringtone with a catchy tune to those around him, he reserved it for his witnesses. He smiled and excused himself from the table. "Sorry, Mom. I gotta take this call." She pursed her lips at him. Business on a Sunday. I wouldn't take it if it weren't an emergency. He grabbed his phone and fled to the backyard. It had stopped ringing, but he wasn't concerned. He always told his witnesses to let the phone ring 3 times. Then, as soon as he'd extricated himself from whatever business he had going on, he'd call back. "Schultz, Connor. They found me." He knew that voice. Sabrina Scanlon now, Bethany Holmes. He remembered the spunky redhead with glittering hazel eyes and an uncanny ability to read lips at a distance. She'd been photographing a wedding and witnessed the bride's father and Uncle Robert and Jeff Belden planning a murder at the reception. She hadn't known that Robert was the head of a crime syndicate responsible for selling illegal weapons to anyone willing to fork over the cash. Robert and Jeff had been arrested, but had made bail. Until they were brought to justice, she was in grave peril, because without her testimony, the evidence against them was pretty thin. "How do you know they found you?" Connor demanded. When she didn't answer immediately, he asked, "Can you hear me? Okay, I hear you. I connected my implants to the phone with Bluetooth. They broke into my house. I jumped out the second-floor window onto a tree and climbed down, hid in the trees. When they came outside, I was able to lip-read part of a phone conversation one of the men was having. He said my real name, and he said I was going to die." "Okay." He mentally calculated how long it would take him to get to her. "Less than an hour. I'll be there by 7. Share your location with me." "I will." What wouldn't they think of next? Until he'd met Bethany, he'd never heard of cochlear implants. Bethany had explained she had 2 magnets surgically placed in the bone behind both ears. She connected external processors equipped with microphones to the magnets, and sounds were electronically sent bypassing her damaged nerve so she could hear. "Don't go back into your house in case they put some kind of listening bug inside." "Not planning on it." Some of the snark was back in her voice. That was good. He went inside and made excuses with his family. While they knew he was a Marshal, they had no idea he was connected with witness protection or WITSEC. It was safer all around if people didn't know about it. An hour later, he pulled up on the side of a gravel road. A young woman with a blue baseball cap over her brown hair and wire-framed glasses pushed up her delicate nose, hopped into his car. "Thanks for coming, Connor. I was so scared." "We'll take care of this." He shifted into drive and pulled onto the main part of the road. "What I want to know is how they found you. Have you followed all the protocols?" "Yes." She glared at him. "I have to ask. You know no one who has followed the rules has been killed." "So you said." "I haven't contacted my family in a year. I have no social media presence. And I have no friends because the idea of lying to a friend stresses me out. I have no idea how they found me." He wanted to believe her, but the implications were grim if he did. If she hadn't broken the rules, who had? A pit formed in Bethany's stomach. If he didn't believe her, if the Marshals thought she disobeyed the rules, they could kick her out of the program. How would she survive without their protection? She fumbled with her phone and held it out to him. "You can look at my phone. I don't own a computer. I have hardly any contacts, none from my life from before." A lump grew in her throat, forcing her to stop and focus on breathing. Not a day had passed that she hadn't missed her sister or her niece. But she had refused to drag her family into WITSEC. She'd been engaged at the time and refused to tell her fiancé about any of this either. No doubt he had married and moved on with his life by now. If Connor made Bethany leave the program, she'd be totally on her own. "Bethany, relax." Connor gently patted her hand once before he withdrew his own. Her skin tingled where he'd touched it. "I'm not going to force you out, but we do need to address how they found you. I'm taking you back to my office. We'll start looking at whatever intel there is and focus on finding you a new identity." She slumped back into her seat. "I'm not going to be Bethany anymore." He shrugged. "I don't know. You definitely can't go back to being Sabrina. Sorry, I know most people don't have to change their first names or their hair color, but both would have stood out too much." She nodded. She'd heard this before. She let her gaze drift out the window while he phoned into his office to let them know he was on the way. She squinted at the bright morning sunshine. It was going to be a gorgeous July day, warm and sunny. But she shivered, chilled to her soul. For a moment, she tuned everything out. A hand tapped her shoulder. She shifted in her seat to face Connor. Without any background noise, she didn't need to read his lips. Seeing him comforted her, though. "Don't worry, Bethany. Everything will be fine." He gave her a professional smile. "Call me Sabrina." Of course she didn't say it. She understood that she had to be Bethany so she wouldn't make a mistake. Soon, she wouldn't be Bethany either. Who would she be next? She kept her thoughts to herself. Soon they turned onto the main road. Out the driver's side window, she spied an airplane. It was coming in low. Too low. "Is there an airport near here?" Connor glanced at her before following her gaze. He stiffened in his seat. "They're going to crash." The plane didn't crash. It was a small two-seater, the kind amateur pilots used. When it drew closer, she saw the outlines of two people in the cockpit. One was piloting. The other man leaned to the side. He held a machine gun out the window next to him and aimed it directly at them. Connor slammed on the brakes. The plane flew over the road too far ahead of them to hit them. However, bullets spat from the weapon, slamming into the pavement with brutal force, punching the hard surface into black powder. Bethany couldn't breathe. There was no doubt in her mind Robert Belden was responsible. Whether the men in the plane were the same ones she saw at her house or others hired to kill her didn't matter. It was clear that he and his family wouldn't stop until she was out of the picture and unable to testify. "Hold on." Connor spun the wheel and did a U-turn in the middle of the road, careening across the grass strip down the middle. If they were on a road with any kind of traffic, someone would have been dead. The airplane's pilot wouldn't give up. He had no doubt of that. Connor had the advantage only because his vehicle had more maneuverability. How did they know that Bethany was in his car? A quick glance showed him her face, nearly colorless in fear. Her lips moved in a silent prayer. He believed she hadn't been the one to lead them to her. Who had? The only possible options made the acid in his gut churn. Either someone knew he was her handler, or someone he trusted had betrayed him. For a millisecond, the idea she had been traced went through his mind. Instantly, he discarded the thought. These people would kill her, not track her. The heavy rumble of the airplane roared behind them. Bethany twisted in her seat. "He's coming back." "I hear him." Connor took the steering wheel in both hands and jerked it to the right, steering the SUV off the road and through the field next to it. The vehicle bounced through the tall grass. Bethany cried out when her head bumped the car's roof. "Sorry. Just keep us alive." He'd do his best. Sweat trickled down his neck and into his cotton shirt. It was a Saturday morning, so he'd aimed for casual clothing rather than the suit and tie he'd wear to the office. If they needed to go on foot, his sneakers would handle the terrain better than his work shoes, too. The plane was coming in for another pass. It was so low, he felt the hum of the motor in his bones. Connor pressed the gas pedal to the floor. He cringed when something scraped viciously at the underside of his SUV. Something pinged like it was being ripped off. "We'll head for those rocks." He had to yell to be heard. "If we can climb down, we might be able to escape him." There were enough jagged edges and narrow paths to make it impossible for a plane, even a small two-seater, to reach them. Which didn't mean the bullets would be ineffective, but it was the only plan he could think of at a moment's notice. The plane rained another round of bullets on them. 3 of them punched through the roof and landed in the back seat upholstery. Another foot, and they'd both have been killed. A light dinged on the console. "You've got a tire with low pressure." Bethany pointed at the display, her voice steady, even though her finger shook. Yeah, but I've got 3 other good tires. They'd stay in the relative safety of the vehicle for as long as they could. The thought had no sooner crossed his mind than a dog ran out into the field barking at them. "Don't hit him," Bethany yelled. He jerked the wheel to miss the animal. The vehicle lurched and shuddered as it hit a hole hidden by the grass, blowing out the back passenger side tire. The wheel twisted from his hands. He grabbed it and tried to keep the vehicle going straight. He must have overcompensated. The next thing he knew, the SUV swung around and smashed against a large boulder. Steam hissed from the radiator, blocking his view of what lay ahead. Connor held in a frustrated snarl. He didn't have time. They needed to get to safety before the killers caught up with them. Bethany stared at the steam spewing from the engine. When it cleared slightly, she gasped at the metal crunched around the enormous rock in the center of the SUV's grill. "We can't sit here." "I know." Connor grabbed his phone and reached for his door handle. "We have to make a run for it. Do you see that ledge?" He pointed at a small rock formation that resembled an awning. She nodded. "We'll head for that one. No matter what happens, don't stop until you reach it." She didn't like the sound of that, but she knew they had to move. They were far too vulnerable sitting here inside the vehicle.
Go.
Bethany followed Connor's example and shoved her door wide open. She scurried from the SUV and bolted toward the rocky shelter ahead of them. In the sky above, the plane circled for another pass. Bethany leaned forward and pumped her arms, pushing herself faster than she'd ever run in her life. The plane was almost upon them. She wasn't going to make it. A year in hiding to keep alive while hitmen hunted her, and she was going to die in a Pennsylvania field without ever seeing her sister or her niece again. And she was dragging Connor Schultz down with her. Regret swirled in her soul. A strong hand wrapped around the top of her left arm and shoved her forward. She tripped and crumbled to the ground, tasting blood as her teeth bit into her lower lip. Connor grabbed her and practically dragged her the last few feet to their destination. She leaned back against the rock, watching as the plane soared past. "We can't stay here." Connor frowned. "These rocks won't stop the plane for long. We need to climb down and cross the creek. Once we find a place to hole up, I'll call the special agent in charge and get directions for where to go next." She nodded, recognizing the title of his boss. The rocks provided some protection, but all too soon they were again in the open, making their way to the creek. Knowing the hitmen chasing her could appear at any moment, Bethany kept her focus on Connor, following his every direction. She didn't waste time with useless conversation or questions. Hopefully, if they made it out of this alive, she'd have the opportunity to ask every question brewing inside her. Like, how did they find her? Or where would she go now? She wasn't used to Bethany yet, and now she would have to let Bethany go the same way she'd had to give up Sabrina. It felt like a giant fist had reached into her chest and squeezed her heart. How could she ever belong anywhere, have any kind of real life when her entire existence was a lie? She shook her head. She was being ridiculous. Why worry about the future when she might not survive the present? Connor wished there were some way to reassure Bethany and take away the fear skulking behind her colored contacts. He refused to lie to her. She was in danger. He would do his best to stand between her and death, but he couldn't promise that she would survive this ordeal. "We haven't seen any sign of anyone in an hour. I don't want to assume we're home free, not yet." He turned his head in time to catch her discouraged nod. "I know. I didn't recognize either of the 2 men who invaded my home. Who knows how many other killers the Belden family has hired to come after me."
Well, as soon as you testify, the Beldens will be in prison. They should never have made bail, but Connor wouldn't dwell on that.
"I'm hoping that very soon the family assets will be frozen.
if they can't pay to hire anyone who'd continue coming for you for free.
A breeze lifted her brown curls, revealing the cochlear implant attached to her head behind her ear. Sometimes he forgot she was deaf. He missed her red hair. The outrageous thought popped into his mind for a second, and then he squashed it. She was an asset, not someone he could develop feelings for. No matter how pretty or spunky she was,
This train of thought was dangerous.
he forced himself to zero in on the only thing that mattered at the moment, keeping his witness alive and getting her into a new safe house. Still, he couldn't ignore the fact that someone had broken protocol. Otherwise, her safe house wouldn't have been violated, and they wouldn't have anyone coming after them. By the time they arrived at the creek, Bethany's energy had visibly sagged. Walking beside him, she panted softly, and her right hand pressed against her side. No wonder. They'd speed-walked and climbed nearly 3 miles nonstop.
We'll take a break soon, I promise.
She shook her head.
Rather be tired and alive. I'm fine. She was a trooper. He'd give her that. He recalled the first time he'd seen her with her vibrant hair and intriguing eyes. His only thought was she'd be harder to hide due to all the things about her that stood out. But she'd surprised him. His gut told him she had not been the one to break the rules. They waded across the creek. It hadn't rained much recently, so it was lower than usual, only coming to their knees. Bethany pulled her foot up, grimacing.
I have mud in my sneaker.
He hid a smile at the pout in her voice. Me too. Can't be helped. They cleared the creek 5 minutes later. Connor ignored the squishing noises their feet made as they trod along a dirt and gravel road. We haven't seen our pilot friend for a while. I'm going to call into my boss for further instructions. Connor paused and dialed. Bethany walked to a fallen tree and sat looking defeated.
He turned away, heart aching. He had to keep her alive, no matter the personal cost. How much longer could they go on like this? Every second that passed, Bethany expected another assassin to pop up in their path. That constant state of tension exhausted her more than walking and climbing. Plus, even with her cochlear implants in, she had to listen more intently to catch what Connor heard effortlessly. It made her brain tired. As soon as possible, she'd have to take a hearing break. The thought terrified her. How would she know danger was coming if she was completely deaf? Most people didn't realize that without her devices, she had 0 residual hearing. Lip reading, which could also be mentally draining, would be her only access to what was being said around her. She tuned into Connor's conversation. A tracking device, I didn't look. But if there was one on my SUV, that means it's someone within the department. A chill went down her spine. The Marshal's department. Was she safe with Connor? She shoved the thought away. Despite everything that had occurred up to this point, she was safer with him than on her own. If it was on my vehicle, they won't be able to track us further. Connor rattled off details about where to find the disabled SUV. Yes, sir, I can find it. Just send me the coordinates. Bethany perked up. Did that mean they had a place to go? Hopefully one where no bad guys would come creeping around with guns? She shouldn't get her hopes up too far. The last safe house hadn't worked out so well. She couldn't help it, though. Hope sparked to life in her heart. Maybe this would be the time she'd attain true security. She said a silent prayer for a safe delivery from her assailants. She thanked God for sending Connor to help her. When he disconnected, she waited for him to reveal what his boss had decided. There's a small Airbnb about a mile from here. It's pretty isolated, but it's not connected with the Marshals in any way. My boss rented it for us for the next 2 days while we are figuring things out. 2 days. She stood frowning. I don't think it's safe for us to be so close to this area for 2 days without a plan. I agree. But don't worry.
My boss will be there this evening, hopefully with a better plan. We just have to stay out of sight for the next 10 or 12 hours. It sounded so simple. But was it possible? She felt like they were walking into a baited trap. With heavy misgivings, she followed Connor. The next mile seemed to take forever. She had blisters on her heels thanks to walking around in soggy shoes without socks. But she hadn't planned on needing to scale a tree and escape her house in the morning. After 20 minutes of silent walking, they arrived at the house. It was small and adorable, but it was also dark and looked easy to breach. There were windows everywhere. She had a bad feeling about this. As far as safe houses went, Connor had to admit he was a bit underwhelmed by this one. The place had so many windows it felt like a glass house. He'd gone through all the rooms when they'd arrived to make sure it was secure. It was a lovely home, but everything seemed so flimsy. If he had his way, they'd be out of here by tonight. He didn't think he could sleep, knowing Bethany was under this roof and killers were searching for her in the area. There had to be a better place to hole up. The idea of leaving her was out of the question. Special agent in charge. Gordon Banks arrived earlier than expected, pulling into the driveway slightly before 5 in the afternoon. When Connor opened the door, Gordon hurried into the house and quickly made sure all the blinds were down. "I brought some food for you to eat. I figured that you probably hadn't eaten in a while." "And Connor here?" he said, handing Connor a box. Inside, Connor found a new cell phone. "Just in case your phone was the issue. I called and had it turned off on the way here." Connor blinked. He hadn't even noticed. It still looked the same. He tried calling his mom and got an error message. Huh. Good thinking. He quickly activated his new phone. Gordon handed a second phone to Bethany. "I have Connor's number already programmed into it, and we'll have to go over other details, like your new identity. But I want you both on the road this evening." "What did you find?" "I found that one of our field agents had been killed and his laptop and phone hacked." Connor's blood froze. "Who?" "Nick. He and Nick had onboarded at the same time nearly 10 years ago. Nick had just turned 37. That was way too young to die." A timid hand touched his arm, then disappeared. Glancing down, he gazed into Bethany's pain-drenched eyes. "I'm sorry about your friend." He fought back the surge of emotion. "Thank you." His throat closed up, keeping him from saying more. She nodded and moved back a step. "I know you've both been through an awful day, but you can't stay here. I sent Sheila to the store to pick up anything you might need. When she arrives, you'll take her car and leave." "Where are we going?" Gordon hesitated. "I don't know." "Wait, what I don't understand?" "Until we figure out what happened, you can't trust anyone. Not even me. What if I'm hacked next? I want you to find a place and hunker down. Don't call me. Don't text unless it's an emergency. I will text you our code when it's safe." He understood that. Gordon had a code with each of his deputy marshals to be used only once. They were on their own. Bethany stood away from the two marshals, relying on her lip-reading skills to follow the fast-paced conversation. She'd taken advantage of the electricity in the house and was charging her implants in the kitchen. Not for the first time, a rush of gratitude filled her. She was thankful that she'd had her backpack ready to grab in case of such an emergency. "Are you sure we can trust Sheila?" She hated interrupting, but felt it was an important question to ask. For the first time since he arrived, Gordon smiled. "I am. Sheila's not an agent. She's my wife. I called her with a list." Momentarily satisfied, Bethany nodded. "Do you have a new identity for my witness?" Connor asked. She tensed again. Not only were they discussing something vital to her, but it bothered her to see Connor refer to her so impersonally. Then she mentally chastised herself. He wasn't her friend. He was barely even an acquaintance. To him, she was nothing more than part of his job. Why that disturbed her so much, she couldn't say. Her implant batteries were charged. She removed the batteries from the chargers and replaced them in her devices. After turning them on, she hooked the earpieces over her ears before connecting the processors to the surgically installed magnets. As to your question, Connor, I don't have a new identity for her. I will leave that up to you. In fact, until we figure out how she's being tracked, and she will be the only ones aware of her new identity. Connor's jaw dropped before he clamped his mouth shut again. Isn't that against the rules? Rules, Marshal Schultz. We're talking about a woman's life. If I need to bend a rule to keep a witness alive, I'll do it. Yes, sir. I'm going to move my car to the street, Gordon said, heading toward the front door. Sheila can pull up to the house. It might only be a short distance, but the less you two are out in plain sight, the better. Sheila and I will leave, then you can follow 5 minutes later. Too much traffic would draw attention. Bethany moved to the window and peered around the edges of the blinds, careful to keep hidden. Gordon backed his car onto the street and pulled along the curb. He waited inside his vehicle. Within 5 minutes, a little blue car pulled into the driveway. A tiny blonde woman hopped out of the driver's side door, leaving the car running. She strode on high heels to the waiting car. They drove off, leaving Bethany and Connor alone. We'll take off in 5, Connor said at her shoulder. Bethany jumped. She hadn't noticed his approach, but now she was hyper-aware of his presence and the scent of mint and coffee emanating from him. She nodded and opened her mouth to respond. Before she got a word out, a black pickup roared up behind the blue car and opened fire. They'd been found again. Get down! Connor dragged Bethany to the floor with him. Crawl! He army crawled toward the back of the house, glancing back to ensure she was following. Bethany's face scrunched into a mask of determination. Her bare forearms scraped across the wooden floor. She kept pace with him, even with her backpack on. Once he saw her wince. When she lifted her arm, he saw a large, jagged splinter in her arm. It would have to wait. They had to find a way out of this house before the killers entered. He led her to the back door. Let's go out here. He lifted his head and then dropped down again. We can't use this exit. Someone's out there. Let's go to the side bedroom. Backtracking, they hurried to the bedroom. Glass broke at the front of the house. Connor waved her toward the bedroom, trying to silently indicate they needed to move faster. Apparently, she understood. She double-timed it toward the room in question. He was right behind her. If necessary, he'd stand and face their attackers, taking the fire to give her the chance to escape. These assailants were worse than cockroaches infiltrating every nook and cranny. Robert Belden and his family needed to be stopped. Unfortunately, Robert was wily. Connor knew he was guilty, but they'd never been able to pin anything on him. Connor would love to know where the money paying for all the hired guns originated. The Belden family had to know they were under scrutiny. He'd have to trust Gordon to search that angle. Doubt crept in. Gordon had left mere minutes before these assailants had shown up, but he knew Gordon and Sheila. They couldn't have been responsible for leading the hit men to their location. But until he knew for sure, Connor wouldn't reach out again. He'd also ditched the new phone, just to be on the safe side. Nor would he use the credit card or debit card in his wallet. In the side bedroom, he slid the window open and carefully removed the screen. Then he assisted Bethany over the edge. He waited until she was crouched on the damp grass before easing over the windowsill and landing lightly beside her. Motioning for her to follow him, he crept along the side of the house. It faced away from the street. He expected to hear shouts or gunshots. When none came, he grabbed her hand in his and led her off into the dimming light. It would be dark within the next hour. For 2 blocks, neither of them spoke. They passed near the creek again. Remembering his promise to himself back at the house,
He took his new cell phone from his pocket and dropped it into the gurgling water. What are you doing? We can't risk it. Go ahead. Get rid of yours too. But what if your boss needs to contact me?
I'll explain it to him later. But right now, we can't risk it. The hitmen somehow followed Sheila. I don't believe Sheila or Gordon are dishonest, but I think their movements might be tracked. She gulped, but didn't argue. He watched her drop her phone into the water. Now what? Now we go off the grid.